I have replayed the first signs so many times that they almost feel rehearsed now, but at the time I did not recognize them. I simply assumed my wife, Elena, had grown restless with routine. She had always been ambitious, always drawn to upward movement, always searching for the next step in life. That was one of the things I admired about her when we first met. I didn't consider that the same trait could turn into a doorway for something else. The earliest shift happened quietly. She began attending more professional development events, as she called them. She claimed her workplace was pushing for more leadership training, more cross-department collaboration, more exposure to executives. I had no reason to doubt her. She had always cared deeply about her career. She said repeatedly that she wanted to be financially secure in the future, that she didn't want to rely completely on me if anything unexpected happened. I took those statements as signs of independence. I didn't consider they could have been rationalizations. Her schedule changed gradually. First, it was one evening a week spent at a workshop, then two, then a weekend conference, then an overnight retreat. She described each event with the same rehearsed enthusiasm, always emphasizing opportunity, networking, the importance of building connections. I believed her because nothing in her tone suggested deceit. She delivered the information casually, the way someone would describe a necessary inconvenience of work life. The first moment that truly caught my attention was a receipt I found in her coat pocket when she asked me to take it to the dry cleaner. The receipt was for an expensive dinner at a rooftop restaurant we had always avoided because of the price. There were only 2 entrees on the bill. She had said she was attending a workshop that night, one that included catered food. It did not align. Still, I told myself she might have gone out with colleagues afterward. She had mentioned in the past that networking often moved outside the formal event. Rationalizing that discrepancy was easy at the time. In hindsight, it was a mistake to dismiss it. The next shift was financial. Elena began buying more luxury items, bags, shoes, professional outfits, pieces far beyond what she normally purchased. She explained that she needed to look the part for the events she was attending. She said that impressions mattered, and that dressing professionally increased her confidence and credibility. She said she was investing in herself. I accepted that explanation because it sounded plausible. I only questioned it internally when I compared her purchases to her salary and noticed the difference was becoming significant. I asked her once how she was affording everything, and she said she had taken on a freelance consulting project. She said the project paid well and was offered to her through one of the workshops she was attending. She said she enjoyed the extra work. Her tone was so matter-of-fact that I believed her again. The next major indicator came from someone completely unrelated to her life. A colleague of mine mentioned that he had seen Elena at a luxury hotel downtown one evening. He said he had been there for a corporate dinner and had noticed her walking through the lobby with a man he didn't recognize. He said she appeared to be in a casual conversation, nothing dramatic, nothing romantic, but that he had been surprised because he thought she was supposed to be at a workshop that night. He said he assumed I already knew about it, and he brought it up only because it had seemed out of place. I remembered nodding and pretending it made sense, saying she must have had a change of plans. Inside, I felt a knot form. I avoided letting suspicion take over. The truth began revealing itself slowly, almost reluctantly. One afternoon, Elena left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she stepped into another room. I wasn't trying to pry, but a notification popped up on the screen. It was from her banking app. It indicated a transfer into her account from someone with a name I didn't recognize. The amount was far larger than anything connected to freelance work. My stomach tightened immediately. The transfer note simply read, "For last week." For last week. I stared at the message for a long moment before stepping away. I didn't touch her computer. I didn't search for more information. I simply registered the fact that money was coming into her account from a source she had never mentioned, and it did not resemble any legitimate consulting arrangement. Later that evening, Elena mentioned in passing that her consulting client had been very satisfied with her work and wanted her to take on more projects. I noted the phrasing. She never described the work itself. She never named the company. She never gave details. She simply referenced satisfaction and payment. She framed it as success. The situation escalated when she upgraded her car without telling me beforehand. She arrived home one day with a luxury vehicle far above her typical means. She said she had received a significant bonus from her freelance work. She said she had wanted to surprise me. I remember nodding, congratulating her, even complimenting the car. But inside, I knew something didn't align. She wasn't earning enough to afford that vehicle, not without help. I spent the next several weeks observing everything carefully. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask probing questions. I didn't want to accuse her without understanding the full picture. Instead, I collected patterns. I tracked the nights she claimed she had work events. I paid attention to the outfits she wore, more expensive, more revealing in subtle ways, more intentionally curated. I noticed her phone was always face down on the table. I noticed she carried an additional credit card I had never seen before. I noticed she was more defensive about her schedule. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. The breakthrough moment occurred when our financial advisor called me to review some documents. He mentioned casually that Elena had requested advice on setting up a separate investment account. He said she had expressed interest in learning how to grow her additional income stream. He assumed I already knew. He said she had mentioned she was receiving generous payments for her work with a private client who valued her contributions greatly. Hearing that phrase, private client, made the entire situation click into place. She hadn't been doing freelance consulting. She had been financially supported by someone who had been giving her money regularly, consistently, generously. I didn't confront her immediately. I wanted to be calm. I wanted to be certain. I started examining every financial document she had printed or left out. She had been careful, but not perfect. A single tax form from the previous year had been placed on her desk, a form indicating she had received personal gifts from an individual named Victor Kovacs. I recognized the name. He was a well-known businessman in the area, wealthy, highly connected, married, older than her by nearly 20 years. He was exactly the type of person who could offer not just money, but lifestyle advantages. The realization hit me with a strange mixture of sadness and inevitability. The pieces aligned perfectly. Learning the name changed everything. Until that moment, the situation had been a collection of suspicions, patterns, indicators. Now it had a face, a background, a financial history. I knew of Victor in the way most people in the city knew him. He owned several real estate developments, appeared in business journals, donated to charity events, and cultivated an image of polished respectability. He was the kind of man who carried influence effortlessly, the kind whose presence made people adjust their posture. Realizing he had been transferring money to my wife created a sense of unreality at first. I tried to tell myself there must have been some legitimate explanation. Perhaps he had hired her for actual consulting work. Perhaps she had been assisting him with something professional. But the numbers on the tax document were far too high for typical freelance services, especially for someone of Elena's position and experience level. They resembled patronage, not payment. I tried to remember how many times she had mentioned meeting someone important from her workshops, how many times she had said she was making meaningful connections. Now those statements took on a different tone. They felt like carefully placed fragments of truth meant to anchor a larger lie. What unsettled me most was the realization that she had been preparing for this arrangement long before I noticed anything. The wardrobe changes, the sudden emphasis on upward mobility, the increased time away from home, the defensiveness about finances, all of it had been groundwork for a lifestyle upgrade she had not achieved through her own career. I needed clarity before making any decisions. I wanted to understand the full extent of her involvement. I began examining my own memories with new structure. I made a timeline of her nights out and compared them to significant events connected with Victor: business galas, charity auctions, exclusive gatherings. I didn't have precise data, only public information, but the alignment was too consistent to ignore. I realized one pattern. Her so-called workshops often coincided with evenings when Victor had been photographed at upscale venues. That discovery created a sinking feeling that was different from anger. It was the feeling of understanding that a lie had not been incidental, but structured. During this period, Elena behaved as if nothing was wrong. She continued attending her supposed events, continued receiving unexplained funds, continued upgrading her lifestyle in small increments. She said she felt motivated and inspired. She said her career was finally moving forward. She said she was proud of herself. She repeated these sentiments often, almost rehearsed, reinforcing the same narrative. I began noticing more alarming details. She received text notifications from a contact listed only as a single initial. She became protective of her phone in a way she had never been before. She stepped outside to take calls. She dressed differently, more polished, more curated. She spent longer preparing for events than she ever had for prior work obligations. I tried to maintain emotional distance while collecting information. I did not want to lash out blindly or confront her without understanding everything. It was not fear that held me back, it was strategy. I knew that confronting her prematurely would allow her to reframe the situation. I needed to hold the higher ground. The clearest turning point occurred when I reviewed our shared credit card statement. There were charges for luxury restaurants on nights she had claimed to be attending professional networking dinners. There were hotel bar charges. There were entries for jewelry stores, items I had never seen her wear. I noticed charges on weekends she had claimed to be staying with a coworker during overnight workshops. All of it formed a pattern too obvious to deny. After that, I stopped searching for explanations. The logic was straightforward. Elena was maintaining a financial and lifestyle-based relationship with a wealthy man. It may have started as a mentorship or professional connection. It may have begun with subtle flattery or opportunity, but it had grown into something structured, ongoing, and hidden. Understanding the nature of the affair helped me keep my composure. It wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was transactional. It was based on lifestyle elevation, social advantage, gifting, and financial support. That made the betrayal feel colder, more calculated. I began planning my next steps. I did not want direct confrontation until I understood the best course of action. I consulted an attorney discreetly. I explained the situation and provided the financial irregularities I had found. The attorney told me that if I chose to end the marriage, I should gather as much evidence as possible regarding the gifts and transfers. She explained that they could be classified as financial misconduct or dissipation of marital assets if certain thresholds were met. She advised me not to confront Elena yet and to keep documenting everything. Her advice was calm and clinical. It gave me a sense of control. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued observing without reacting. Elena grew bolder in her lifestyle enhancements. She hired a personal stylist. She received a designer handbag worth more than some people's monthly rent. She said these items were incentives from her client and claimed she was being rewarded for her hard work. Her story grew more embellished, less coherent. She insisted her success was the result of her talent and connections. Her face shifted when she talked about it. She carried a glow of subtle pride mixed with secrecy. She seemed thrilled with her new life, unaware that I was watching everything with increasing clarity. One evening, she returned home wearing a necklace I had never seen. It was expensive, delicately crafted, clearly custom-made. She told me her client had gifted it to her because she had exceeded expectations on a project. She said it was a token of appreciation. She said she felt valued. I recognized the emotional language of someone rationalizing an arrangement they knew was precarious. At no point did she look ashamed.
That was when my understanding deepened into something firmer. This affair was not merely physical, it was aspirational. She was using this man as an elevator into a world she had always wanted to access. She wasn't in love, she wasn't swept away by emotion. She was drawn to the lifestyle, the money, the exclusivity. She had chosen a path that aligned with personal ambition over moral loyalty. Once I understood that, I stopped wondering whether she loved him. Love wasn't part of the equation. She wanted a life she didn't want to build slowly. The final confirmation arrived in an unintentional way. Elena left a small envelope on the counter, probably without realizing it had slipped out of her bag. It contained an invitation to a private event hosted by Victor, an exclusive dinner reserved for influential professionals and their guests. The invitation included a note written in elegant script addressed to her. The note congratulated her on adjusting so well to the arrangement. That wording eliminated the last traces of ambiguity. The truth was now complete. Holding the invitation in my hands produced a sensation that surprised me. It wasn't rage or heartbreak, it was confirmation. The note, the tone, the reference to an arrangement removed any need to interpret. Elena had entered a relationship defined by financial benefit and lifestyle enhancement. She had committed to it willingly, consistently, strategically. Any lingering doubt vanished. I placed the envelope back exactly where I found it and left it untouched. I wanted her to believe nothing had been discovered yet. Maintaining her sense of security allowed me to prepare without interference. Emotional responses had no place in what came next. The attorney I had consulted earlier reviewed the new information and told me the situation was more severe than typical infidelity. She said the financial benefits Elena had accepted could be treated as unjustifiable marital asset diversion. She advised me to continue documenting everything discreetly. She also mentioned that, depending on the jurisdiction, dissipation could affect the division of assets significantly. Hearing that gave me a clear framework for action. I focused on collecting evidence that required no invasion of privacy. I documented her luxury purchases, the bank transfers, the tax form, the new car, the stylist receipts, the financial advisor's statements. I gathered anything that reflected substantial financial gains tied to the affair. I did not touch her phone or break into her accounts. I acted strictly within legal boundaries. It was important to me, morally and strategically, to avoid crossing lines. During this period, Elena behaved in a way that exposed her priorities more clearly. She became increasingly absorbed in her own image. She spent long hours preparing for events. She posted more curated photos online, always showcasing her new outfits, her new accessories, her new circles. She projected a version of herself that aligned perfectly with the lifestyle she was chasing. She interacted with me politely, but distantly. Her tone carried a subtle air of superiority, as if she believed she had outgrown our life. She spoke about the future with vague references to new opportunities and exciting possibilities. She no longer asked about my work or my projects. Her focus had shifted entirely towards the world she was stepping into. I watched all of this quietly. I didn't confront her. I didn't hint at what I knew. I continued documenting everything with calm determination. The next major development occurred through a social encounter. A woman I knew through a community event approached me one afternoon and mentioned casually that she had seen Elena at a private gala weeks earlier. She said Elena had been arriving in a luxury vehicle accompanied by a well-dressed older man. She said she assumed they were business partners. She described Elena's appearance as glamorous. She said Elena looked like she belonged in that environment. Her description matched the timeline of one of the so-called overnight workshops. I thanked her politely and left the conversation soon after. Inside, the information fit neatly into the structure I was building. I wrote it down when I got home and added it to the chronology. Later that week, Elena announced she would be leaving for a 3-day conference. She presented it the same way she always did, with the same tone of professionalism and inevitability. She emphasized how important the event was for her career. She packed outfits that did not resemble anything related to her field of work. She took her designer luggage, a recent acquisition she had said was a reward for her client work. When she left for the conference, I did not track her or follow her. I didn't need to. I used those 3 days to finalize my preparation. I met with my attorney again, provided additional documentation, and outlined the steps I planned to take. She advised me on timing and strategy, emphasizing the importance of presenting the truth clearly and calmly to people who mattered in our shared social circles, just as I had done in my previous situation. I also drafted a factual summary of the financial irregularities. No personal commentary, no accusations, just evidence. My goal was not humiliation. It was truth. And truth alone, in situations like this, tends to create its own consequences. Elena returned from her trip appearing more confident than ever. She arrived home wearing a designer coat I had never seen before. She carried a gift bag from a luxury boutique. She moved through the house with an air of triumph. She said she had made incredible connections and that she felt her life was finally aligning. She said she felt empowered. She said the conference had been invaluable. Her statements sounded like rehearsed affirmations, as though she needed to hear herself say them. She seemed unaware that her transformation was near its end. Over the next week, she continued her pattern without any deviation. She attended more events. She spent increasing amounts of money. She appeared more invested in maintaining the image she had built with Victor's assistance. She seemed convinced that her new world was secure. The moment of exposure required precision. I chose to meet with her parents first. They had always respected me and valued integrity. They held traditional views on loyalty and responsibility. I arranged a meeting with them without Elena knowing. When I presented the evidence, only the financial aspects, they reacted with disbelief, followed by disappointment. They said they had noticed changes in her, but had assumed it was career-related. They said they had never imagined she would engage in a financially motivated affair. They asked how long it had been going on. I said I could only provide the timeline based on available evidence. They did not defend her. They expressed regret that I had been put in this situation. They said they understood why I was preparing to leave the marriage. The next step was informing the financial advisor, not with accusations but with necessary clarity. I explained that Elena's separate account and the gifts she had been receiving were connected to an extramarital relationship. He reacted with concern and said he had suspected something unusual but had not wanted to assume. He said he would adjust his recommendations accordingly and provide documentation as needed. Finally, I notified a small number of mutual friends who had direct roles in our social network. I provided facts only, no commentary. Their responses ranged from shock to sadness to quiet understanding. None of them doubted the evidence. By the time Elena realized that her parents were distant with her, the truth had already taken root in all the important places. She attempted to contact them repeatedly during a weekend visit, but they provided her only brief responses. They did not explain why, they simply behaved colder, more formal. She sensed something was wrong, but still did not connect the pieces. The final step was the actual confrontation. I planned it for the morning after she returned from another so-called event. She arrived home late, appearing worn and distracted. She placed her new purchases on the counter and began reviewing her schedule aloud, describing another upcoming gathering she intended to attend.
I waited until she finished her routine. I presented the envelope containing the evidence. I didn't speak in anger. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed it on the table and stepped back. She opened it. She scanned the documents. She recognized the financial records. She recognized the dates, the purchases, the transfers, the invitation, the note with the phrase describing the arrangement. Her face changed slowly, expression by expression, as comprehension settled in. She realized immediately that the truth had spread. When Elena finished reading through the documents, I saw her posture shift. She did not collapse or react dramatically. She simply froze in a rigid, calculating stillness, as if assessing the full scope of what had been uncovered. Her expression moved from confusion to recognition, then to something resembling fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the elevated life she had been building. Her mind was visibly processing the implications. She realized that her parents knew. She realized that our financial advisor knew. She realized that a small but influential portion of our social circle understood the truth. She also realized that her narrative, the one she had carefully constructed about her professional growth and newfound success, had lost its foundation. She attempted to speak, but halted before forming any words. She seemed to understand that her usual explanations would not work. The evidence was too complete, too structured, too undeniable. She closed the envelope slowly, almost ceremonially, as if acknowledging the end of something. The next phase unfolded quietly. Elena withdrew into herself over the next several days. She moved through the house with subdued precision, no longer carrying the buoyancy she once had. She avoided the luxury items she had previously flaunted. She kept her phone close, but no longer with the same confidence. Her behavior resembled someone trying to determine whether a collapsing structure could still be salvaged. She attempted to resume her normal routine, but her actions betrayed a sense of unease. She dressed for events with less enthusiasm. She spent more time staring at her reflection without making adjustments. She returned home earlier than usual, sometimes hours before she was expected. She began cooking dinner again, something she had stopped doing months earlier. The shift in her habits was not a sign of remorse, it was a sign of instability. She was recalibrating after losing control of the narrative. During this period, I remained calm and distant. I did not engage her emotionally. I did not offer comfort or criticism. I focused on preparing the formal dissolution of the marriage. My attorney drafted the necessary documents, incorporating the financial evidence meticulously. She advised me that the court would likely view the affair and the accompanying monetary gifts as a dissipation of marital assets, which would place me in a significantly stronger position during division. While Elena drifted through the house in a fragile haze, I arranged meetings, reviewed legal paperwork, and ensured all necessary documentation was properly stored. My actions contrasted sharply with her paralysis. The moment that solidified the direction of the process came when Elena received a text notification late one night. She opened it, then locked her phone quickly. Her face tightened in a way I recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone whose carefully curated world had begun to crumble. I suspected that the message was from Victor. The shift in her behavior suggested that he had learned about the exposure. I imagined he had started distancing himself to protect his own reputation. A man in his position would not tolerate unnecessary scandal. Her detachment over the next 2 days confirmed this suspicion. She spent hours sitting in silence, staring at her hands, as if replaying decisions she could no longer undo. She moved slower. She avoided leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. The confident posture she had perfected during her months of transformation had dissolved entirely.
Her parents became aware of her unraveling. Her mother contacted me privately and expressed sadness over Elena's behavior. She said Elena had told her only that she was going through something difficult, without disclosing details. Her mother said she could sense that Elena was hiding behind vague statements. Her father remained curt, refusing to engage in the kind of sympathetic cushioning Elena may have been used to. My communications with them remained respectful and brief. I did not criticize their daughter, I simply confirmed facts when asked. They understood the gravity of the situation without further elaboration. The shift in social circles unfolded naturally and quietly. Mutual friends who had been close to Elena began to distance themselves. They did not express judgment explicitly, but their withdrawal was unmistakable. Her sudden lifestyle elevation had already caused subtle tension. The revelation of how it had been funded added clarity. People sensed that the outward glamour had been built on an unsteady base, and once the truth became known, the admiration transformed into discomfort. Within a month of the confrontation, the separation process was in motion. I presented her with the formal documents. She reviewed them with a blank expression. She did not attempt to dispute the grounds. She did not protest the division recommendations. She seemed almost relieved to have a structure placed in front of her, as if she lacked the energy to initiate one herself. The downfall of her affair with Victor became increasingly apparent through her actions. She stopped receiving any new luxury items. She stopped attending exclusive events. She no longer used her personal stylist. She returned her new car and replaced it with a modest one, claiming she no longer needed something extravagant. She canceled memberships she had previously been proud of. She began dressing more simply. All signs pointed to the conclusion that Victor had severed the arrangement once he sensed exposure or reputational risk. Her retreat from that world was not graceful. She clung to remnants of it for weeks, trying to maintain certain habits, but those habits were unsustainable without financial reinforcement. Her aspirational identity had been built on borrowed status. Without external support, it collapsed. The emotional fallout hit her next. She became more visibly anxious. Her movements grew hesitant. She slept less. She avoided eye contact. She appeared haunted, not by guilt, but by the loss of a lifestyle she had come to depend on. The contrast between her old sense of ambition and her current fragility was stark. As the divorce proceedings progressed, she attempted one final shift. She began adopting a more apologetic posture, approaching situations with an air of regret. She presented herself as someone who had made a mistake and was now trying to correct it. She behaved as if contrition alone could undo the consequences. This was not remorse rooted in empathy. It was self-preservation. I maintained distance. I treated her fairly, but not indulgently. I allowed the legal process to proceed without interference. Eventually, the day arrived when she packed her belongings. She moved slowly through the house, carefully folding clothes, wrapping fragile items, and sorting through drawers. She hesitated often, touching objects as if trying to hold on to a version of herself that no longer existed. She carried far fewer luxury items than she had accumulated. Many had been returned, sold, or quietly discarded. When she finished packing, she paused in the entryway. She appeared smaller than I remembered, diminished physically and emotionally. She lifted her bags and walked out of the house without speaking. The silence felt appropriate. After she left, I walked through the house and felt the shift immediately. The atmosphere was lighter. The spaces were balanced again. The absence of her restless ambition created a calmness I had not realized was missing. I finalized the paperwork shortly after. The dissolution was granted cleanly. The division favored me significantly due to the documented financial misconduct. My attorney confirmed that the outcome was unusually decisive.
The aftermath did not bring catharsis or triumph. It brought clarity. I realized that the betrayal had not been personal in the romantic sense. It had been a matter of values, her values clashing with mine. She chose elevation over loyalty, status over stability, external validation over internal integrity. Understanding that brought closure. In the weeks following the finalized divorce, the house settled into a stillness that felt unfamiliar at first. The absence of Elena's constant motion created a silence I had not experienced in years. It was not an oppressive silence, it was a clean one. It resembled the quiet that follows a long storm, when the air feels sharper and the remaining debris finally becomes visible. I used that time to organize the house in a way that felt natural to me again. I removed the items she had left behind, trinkets she no longer wanted, pieces connected to her brief climb into a world that had rejected her once the truth surfaced. The process was therapeutic in a pragmatic way. Clearing physical remnants aligned with clearing mental ones. During this period, I received occasional updates about her indirectly. Someone mentioned seeing her working longer hours at her original job.
Another person noted that she seemed more withdrawn, as if trying to remain inconspicuous. A mutual acquaintance stated that her social presence had diminished significantly. None of this surprised me. The network she had joined had likely closed its doors to her once her arrangement with Victor ended. I learned later, through a credible source, that Victor had distanced himself almost immediately after I exposed the financial irregularities. He had apparently informed her, without emotion, that their arrangement could not continue under the risk of reputational damage. He had a business empire to protect, a public image to maintain, and a family who would not tolerate scandal. Elena, lacking leverage, had surrendered quietly. He moved on effortlessly, the way powerful men do when consequences touch them but do not penetrate. Elena, on the other hand, began navigating the aftermath with diminished resources. She no longer had the external support that had elevated her lifestyle. She no longer had access to elite events. She no longer had the cushion of luxury purchases, spa services, and carefully curated experiences. She had lost the life she tried to claim, and she had lost the stability she once took for granted with me. The emotional shift within her became evident through small updates shared by others. She reportedly appeared more contemplative. She stopped wearing the last remaining designer items she kept. She avoided discussions about her future. She grew quieter, checking in less frequently with people. She had transitioned from a woman who moved with bold ambition to someone navigating uncertainty with caution. I did not take satisfaction in these changes. I did not wish for her suffering. What I observed, or learned indirectly, was simply the natural outcome of choices made without foresight. She had attempted to leap into a world that had never been hers, and discovered that such worlds only accept those who provide strategic value. Once she lost that value, she was no longer welcome. What mattered more to me than her decline was the sense of stability I began to regain. I restructured my daily routines. I returned to hobbies I had set aside. I invested more time into friendships and family connections that had always been steady. The absence of deception created a mental clarity I had forgotten I was capable of experiencing. One of the most striking realizations came during a conversation with my attorney after the divorce had been finalized. She remarked that cases involving financial infidelity often left spouses in emotional disarray for extended periods. She observed that my composure throughout the process had been unusual. I understood what she meant. I had not allowed myself to spiral into emotional chaos. I had focused instead on clarity, truth, and strategy. The stability I gained afterward affirmed that approach. About 2 months after the divorce, Elena contacted me indirectly through a mutual friend. She reportedly said she hoped I had found peace. She said she regretted the choices she made, although she did not elaborate. She did not attempt to reconnect. She did not try to justify herself. Her message, as relayed by the friend, seemed more like an acknowledgement of finality than an attempt to revisit the past. Around that same time, word spread that she had moved into a smaller apartment in a modest part of town. She had returned to living within her means. She had stopped mentioning high-powered opportunities. She had removed her posts showcasing luxury experiences. She had shed the aspirational persona she had built. People who interacted with her described her as subdued, humbled, and guarded. Again, none of this brought me joy or vindication. It simply confirmed that the world she had pursued had never been built for her to stay in. It had consumed her ambition and left her with the consequences. As for Victor, he continued his public life uninterrupted. His business expanded. His public appearances resumed. His marriage, from outward observation, remained intact. He was the kind of man who had insulated himself from fallout long before any scandal could touch him. Men in such positions rarely experience significant consequences in situations like these. His world remained unshaken. What mattered to me was that Elena's choices no longer influenced my life. Time continued slipping forward. I adjusted to a new rhythm. I renovated parts of the house. I traveled for the first time in months.
I established new social circles and strengthened old ones. People commented that I seemed lighter, clearer, more grounded. They said it appeared as if something heavy had finally been lifted. They were right. The most meaningful shift occurred internally. I no longer replayed the events leading to her affair. I no longer analyzed where I had missed signs. I no longer wondered whether I could have prevented it. I understood that her decisions had been rooted in her values, not my shortcomings. I understood that a person's appetite for elevation cannot be satisfied by loyalty alone. It seeks external validation, prestige, and shortcuts. It searches outward, not inward. The clarity brought unexpected peace. Reflecting on the entire experience months later, I realized that justice had unfolded naturally, not through vengeance, not through confrontation, but through honest exposure. Revealing the truth to people who mattered ensured that she could not reshape the narrative. Presenting the evidence calmly ensured that I remained aligned with my principles. Allowing her decisions to collapse under their own weight ensured that the consequences were self-generated, not imposed. Her affair had been transactional, driven by aspiration. It ended not because I forced it to end, but because it had no structural integrity. It depended on secrecy, and once secrecy dissolved, the arrangement lost its stability. The dissolution of the marriage and the collapse of her new life were simply the natural consequences of her choices. Months later, on a quiet evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over the yard. The air felt calm. My mind was still. I realized that what I had regained, self-respect, stability, clarity, was far more valuable than anything I had lost. I had survived a betrayal not through anger, but through understanding. I had navigated a collapse not through retaliation, but through truth. I had walked away from a broken structure and built something steadier in its place. Elena's story continued somewhere else, in a quieter life shaped by the consequences she had earned. My story moved forward with a clearer sense of who I was, what I valued, and what I would never again ignore. And that, ultimately, was where the real closure came from. And as always, thanks for watching. Like, share, and let's know what you think. See you in the next one. Peace.